Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. Ask everyone here in-house to make that last courtesy check that cell phones have been turned off before we're invaded from the outside during the program. It's always appreciated by the speakers and especially those recording our program. We will post the program within 24 hours on the Heritage website for your future reference as well. Hosting our discussion is James Gattuso, who serves as Senior Research Fellow in Regulatory Policy, focusing on telecommunications and regulatory issues for Heritage. Prior to joining us, he was Vice President for Policy at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Additionally, he has served as Vice President for Policy Development with Citizens for a Sound Economy, as Deputy Chief of the Office of Plans and Policy at the Federal Communications Commission, and as an Associate Director of the President's Council on Competitiveness in the Office of Vice President Dan Quayle. Please join me in welcoming James Gattuso. Jim?
Thank you and good afternoon. In 1939, one of my favorite authors, James Thurber, wrote a book about a man named Walter Mitty. Mitty was an unassuming, quiet man, but dreamed big, creating worlds of wonderment and adventure using simply his imagination, knowledge, and intellect. In that same year, another one of my favorite authors, George Gilder, was born. In a sense, George is a real-life Walter Mitty, outwardly unassuming, but with a talent for making things that most people see as ordinary or technical come to life in grand, colorful, and meaningful ways. The difference is that the tales George Gilder spins are real. Time and again, he has taken dry facts and shown us what they mean for us, the economy, society, and our future. George has quite a personal history, starting out as a speechwriter for Nelson Rockefeller, of all people, and also working for Romney, George, that is. From that inauspicious beginning, he wrote Wealth and Poverty in 1981, helping to launch the Reagan supply-side revolution. He also found time to launch a think tank, the Discovery Institute in Seattle, with his college roommate, Bruce Chapman. And I'm sure you don't know this, but I went to college with Bruce's younger brother, Roy Chapman.
I did not know that.
And we did nothing so productive as launch a think tank. In the 1990s, George turned his attention to the digital revolution with his books Microcosm and Telecosm, among others, making the insular and engineer-dominated worlds of semiconductors and telecommunications understandable, painting in almost poetic terms the then looming future, now our present, that these technologies would provide. His newest book, Information and Power, has been described as...
Knowledge and power.
Oh, excuse me. The worst thing you do in introduction, you got the name of the book wrong. Knowledge and Power.
I just misspelled Ed Follner in my inscription to the book. So, we're really...
We're off to a good start. The newest book, Knowledge and Power, has been described as the third in this technological trilogy. And if I say, George mentioned before the program that he thinks this may be his most important book since Wealth and Poverty. So if you join me in welcoming George Gilder.
Thank you. It's great to be at Heritage, as always, which is, I regard to be the epicenter of conservative politics and creativity. And creativity is what is most crucial in capitalism, and what is most missed in all economic models. And this essential problem is what I've been grappling with, I discover retrospectively, my whole career. How do you reconcile economic models that all really originated with Adam Smith's aspiration of creating a Newtonian scheme of economics, a predictable great machine, a system of the world as Newton had launched. Adam Smith wanted to create a similarly deterministic model of social life and economics. And that aspiration has continued ever since. I mean, economists have all essentially been mimicking the physical model and assuming, in essence, that economies were physical entities, governed chiefly by the kind of laws that govern the material world, the world of physics. And I wrote Wealth and Poverty really in rebellion against this, this idea. And there's quite a lot of dissident uneasiness with Adam Smith expressed in Wealth and Poverty. I've felt somewhat paralyzed in a way by the model of the economy which the great conservative economists have launched, which is based on a celebration of freedom, and yet can't, in fact, embrace freedom in the models that they espouse. There's entrepreneurial creativity is patched in from the outside. It's assumed to be somehow exogenous. It's something that emerges from the culture. It's and the economy is really a system of order and equilibrium, and even the most ambitious theories of entrepreneurial economics from the Austrians treat the entrepreneur as an opportunity scout or as an arbitrageur reconciling price differences, or it's always assumed, even in Adam Smith, that it's the extent of the market that determines the division of labor. Somehow the division of labor, all the proliferating inventions and differentiations of economic life, derive in some way from a pre-existing market. And it's really the market that determines the division of labor. Then about 10 years ago, in 2000, I went to a speech by Peter Drucker in Seattle. It was the last time I ever saw Peter Drucker. He was in his 90s, and he was in failing health, and they wheeled him out onto the stage in a great fluffy chair, and he was addressing a Forbes magazine CEO conference, and it was jam-packed auditorium, the International Trade Center in Seattle. And Drucker came out, was wheeled out into the center of the stage where he was going to be the oracle of the conference. And they got out to the center of the stage, and suddenly I noticed his head just plop back on the back of this big easy chair where he was sitting, and it looked as if he'd fallen asleep or worse. It was really a terrible moment for all of us. And then all of a sudden he fell forward, and I got up. I was in the front row, and everybody was just terrified. But he fell forward, and then his right arm came across, and he pointed out toward the audience. He'd gotten their attention, and he said, "There's only one thing I want to tell you today. only one thing that I have to say to you today, and that is that no one in your business, he told all these CEOs, no one in your business knows less about it, knows less about your enterprise than your CFO. And everybody sort of wondered, what did he mean? I mean, this was the year 2000. It was the great era of CFOs. You remember Scott Sullivan of WorldCom and Fasto of Enron and Dammerman of GE, who was really responsible, according to Welch, for transforming GE into a great financial leviathan. All these great CFO figures, CEOs wouldn't move without consulting their CFO. And here Drucker was saying, no one knows less about your business than your CFO. And what did he really mean? And what he was talking about was that CFOs are looking at the economy through their economy. They're really economists for a single company. And they're looking at their economy through a rearview mirror. They're looking at the numbers, the past numbers, registering past performance. And the past is always deterministic. The past is settled. And but mathematics and an economics suitable for describing the past is totally unsuitable for accommodating the future, which is based on human creativity. Albert Hirschman said the fundamental characteristic of creativity is that it always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't need it, and socialism would work. And the fact is that all the studies of economics and of business life do show that earnings and stock prices and all these various indices that CFOs fathom are not serially correlated. That is, what happens, the numbers at any particular time do not predict what any subsequent time. The future is not implicit in the past. And so if you end up studying numbers of the past, you are almost prohibited from understanding the dynamics of economic change and creativity, which are the foundation of a capitalist economy. So after writing Wealth and Poverty, which expressed in often kind of poetic language this idea that the difference between the past and the future and what was needed for an entrepreneurial economics. After that, I plunged into Silicon Valley, and I spent 20 years learning about technology and studying it intimately. I learned from Carver Mead, the great philosopher king of Silicon Valley, who both did the research behind Moore's Law and named Moore's Law. And really, it could as well have been Mead's Law, but Gordon had the company, Gordon Moore. So, but Carver Mead became the Gordon E. Moore Professor of Science and Engineering at Caltech, and literally was responsible for as many as 30 or 40 companies from his students. And he nursed them along and served on the boards and really is a father of Silicon Valley. And he taught me about technology. And at that point, I always did believe that in order to understand technology, what you had to understand was physics. And physics is dominated by these determinist models, that what happens in the past determines the future. And indeed, most physical models actually are neutral in time. You have to import thermodynamics in order to get an arrow of time in physics. All the equations of quantum electrodynamics work from the future to the past as well as from the past to the future. Physics is essentially aspires to be a determinist science. And physics produced the transistor in 1948, and I assumed that the transistor was the great invention of this era and really was the foundation of all our technologies. But at the same time in 1948, as I discovered when I plunged into telecom and began moved from the microcosm into the telecosm and projected worldwide webs of glass and light, I discovered Claude Shannon, who in 1948 invented, essentially consummated, what's called information theory. Now, information theory in telecom is a very sort of narrow and technical kind of field. It's designed to gauge the passage of information down a channel in the face of noise. And because all channels in the world are afflicted with noise. And in order to create a global telecom system, you have to know how much information can pass through which wires at what time and how to interconnect them. And all these calculations are intensely mathematical and but rigorous and profound in their implications. And they enabled our information age. Shannon both enabled and defined and described the information age. And Shannon was following Turing and Gödel and when I defined my definition of information theory for economics, I had to generalize Shannon. So rather than having a channel in the face of noise, transmission of information down a channel in the face of noise, I have human creations treated as transmissions down a channel, whether a wire or the world, in the face of the power of noise. And that is essentially importing the central concept of Shannon's theory into economic theory. And the reason I wanted to do this was because of a crucial point about Shannon's information theory. It defines information as surprising bits, as unexpected data, as news. In other words, if everything I tell you today you already expect, you already know, then no information is transmitted. Shannon defines information as surprise. And thus, all the followers of Shannon, including all the people at Qualcomm who it really introduced me to information theory and Shannon, adopted this approach. And so here we have this elaborate mathematical system on which the entire information economy is founded, and on which all our computers and networks are all based, incorporating as its central concept surprise. And this goes back again to the central characteristic of entrepreneurial creativity is also surprise. And information mathematics is a fundamental step ahead of the mathematics of the calculus, essentially, on which deterministic physics is based. The mathematics of information theory really began with the great figure of 20th century logic and philosophy, Kurt Gödel. And Kurt Gödel demonstrated that no logical system, including mathematics, can be self-consistent and coherent and complete. All logical systems are necessarily dependent on premises outside themselves that cannot be proved within the system. So what this meant, as Alan Turing showed, and another big step forward in information theory, is that no computer system can be complete, that no computer system can even predict its own outcomes, whether any particular program or algorithm can ever be completed. And Turing said that this meant that in order to have a really successful system, you needed oracles. And Turing invented the Turing machine, which is the complete generic computer, in order to prove the fundamental principles of computation, and which are essentially the fundamental principles of mathematics. And he discovered that that these computers, all computers, are necessarily incomplete, and they cannot. The schemes that they enact cannot be are not self-sufficient. They are dependent on premises beyond themselves. So Turing declared that you have to have an oracle. You have to have some outside intelligence in order to program a computer. And so that's where Oracle got its name. You need a human, and the one point about this oracle, Turing said, the one principle is it cannot be a machine. And it really has to be a creative human being. And thus, Gödel opened mathematics to surprise and creativity. And information theory springs from this discovery by Gödel, which was the importance of which was identified by John von Neumann, who propagated it to the world. Because at the time, everyone thought you could have a completely determinist and complete mathematics and physics that could encompass all reality, past and future. And Gödel demonstrated that expectation was impossible. And from that insight, John von Neumann elaborated information theory, and Claude Shannon ultimately formulated it. And as a mathematics of creativity and surprise, and based on And so you have this, this is really a mathematical revolution, and Gregory Chaitin has just wrote a book called Proving Darwin, which doesn't prove Darwin, but which he thinks it's impossible really to, because he upholds mathematics of creativity. You know, ideas and information dominate in this, this way of addressing the world. And so knowledge and power essentially takes this, this revolution in mathematics, technology, information theory, epitomized as information theory, and translates it into economics as an economics of creativity and surprise. And that really changes economics from the root to the consummation. I mean, it's a different way of seeing all economics, and it's aligned with the great insights of conservative economics of the past. Hayek and Thomas Sowell were crucial in really defining the role of knowledge in economics. And once you understand the role of knowledge, you understand that the destructiveness and the, of describing economics as an incentive system. We all like to think of economics as an incentive system with this homo economicus at the center of it, making little optimizing choices. But that's fundamentally antagonistic to an economics of freedom based on human creativity and invention. And capitalism is an economics of creativity and invention, not an economics of incentives. All systems have incentive structures in them, and it's worth it to examine the incentive structures, revealing discoveries can be made. But that's not what's going on fundamentally in an economy. And as Thomas Sowell points out in his very book, Knowledge and Decisions, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the natural resources, all the material endowment that we have today. All the difference between our economy and the Neanderthal's economy comes from the proliferation and accretion and accumulation of knowledge. Matter, the physicists tell us, is conserved. Knowledge grows and expands. All wealth is an effect of knowledge. All economic transactions are transactions of the differential knowledge of the various participants in the economy. And so you can't, the whole effort to create a material economics resulted in this illusion which afflicted almost every great economist, including conservative economists from Adam Smith to Schumpeter, that at some point capitalism would exhaust itself, and we'd arrive at a stationary state. And just all great economists have accepted this idea. Somehow resources would be exhausted, and we'd come to a stationary state. But of all states, the stationary state, as I said, in wealth and poverty, is the one most likely to wither away. The other, when you start with a knowledge economy, you understand why it's overwhelmingly a supply-side economy. The demand side has very little information in it, and the information in the economy is overwhelmingly on the supply side. And it's the product of these long processes of savings and investment and creation and discipline and invention and individual planning and aspiration that produces the goods, embodying the knowledge that we exchange with one another across an economy. And the great, and knowledge is in all our heads, as Hayek explained to us. We're all different. We all come from different places. We all know different things. And knowledge is intrinsically dispersed and distributed around the world. And if you're going to have an effective economy, you have to link knowledge with power. And thus, if you're going to have a successful economy, you have to distribute power as widely as knowledge is distributed. And that's what capitalism accomplishes. And the fundamental error of all the big government programs is that it centralizes knowledge, and thus, centralizes power, and thus stultifies the economy. It necessarily separates knowledge from power and stultifies the economy and thwarts the creativity which is fundamental to all economic growth. Now the good news of this, it being the economy essentially being a noosphere, a knowledge domain, is that it can change as fast as people's ideas can change. So changes in policy can have radical and powerful effects on the economic environment. Economists tend to regard conditions as somehow intractable. If you have a problem of deficits or a problem of inflation or a problem of stagnation, it's difficult to change. That the past has tremendous inertia that prevents transformations. But the upside of the book is really in a chapter called The Explosive Elasticities of Freedom. And it goes through all the countries over the years that have radically changed their policies and radically changed their economies virtually overnight. It just isn't true that because we're currently in a slough of deficits and debt and that we can't turn our economy around tomorrow by electing new leaders or changing the minds of the existing leaders, which is always that is a hard problem, because the leaders are all by definition stupid. They're separated from all the knowledge in the economy, and they have the illusion that their little worlds of information that they command actually correspond to the reality of the economic world. And so they're obtuse and proud of it, and so they probably have to be thrown out. They can't be converted. One of the economies that I've written about a lot in recent years, because chasing information theory and its fruits, I've went to Israel a lot over the last 10 years and found all sorts of fabulous companies there. Israel actually, I think, is more productive than Silicon Valley today. It's more creative and more and more vital to the U.S. economy than Silicon Valley. And my book, The Israel Test, explains that argument. But in any case, Israel is just one of a whole series of examples from, I learned about New Zealand from McTeague, what's his,
Morris.
what?
Morris.
Morris McTeague here, and he's given brilliant presentations on the just complete turnaround of New Zealand by just dismantling their government and allowing the creativity of the New Zealanders to escape the stultification of socialism in the mid-'80s. And, you know, going from importing food to becoming one of the world's leading exporters and provoking unfair trade practices, suit from the state of Wisconsin for dumping dairy products. Wisconsin couldn't compete with New Zealand in dairy products after New Zealand abolished its agriculture department. And that's how they did it. They went from having 10 dairy products to 17,000 dairy products, from being an importer of food to being a powerful global exporter by abolishing the Department of Agriculture. It's an idea. Israel was just about dead in 1985. It had spikes of inflation as high as 1,000%. It was a pathetic failure, and was reproducing Weimar Germany in the middle of the Middle East. It was really a brilliant idea. While all around it, countries tried to reproduce Nazi Germany. It was, and they were just about through, Israel, at that point. The whole dream was just about over. Their economy had failed. Socialism was a complete dead end, as usual. And they turned it around and, moved the ownership of corporations in Israel from 80% owned by the government to 20%, and cut tax rates and transformed their economy. And now they're the leading source of technology in the world, not per capita, I think actually in absolute terms. But anyway, Canada did it. Lots of countries have done it. A knowledge economy can be turned around overnight and rendered a powerhouse of progress and prosperity. And that's what I hope for America after they read Knowledge and Power. Thank you so much. I'd be delighted to answer questions as long as...
Let me start over here.
Given your description of knowledge and power, decentralizing both of them out to the population, now that the government is trying to consolidate healthcare under its wing, and that the healthcare industries have been such drivers of innovation and improving the quality of people's physical, mental, and psychological life, what is your outlook for that sector? And if it's not a positive one, how do you suggest we change things to get it to where you'd like it to be?
Yeah. Well, Obamacare, has no more doctors and a tax on medical instruments and 16,500 new IRS agents. That's going to deliver a lot of new health care. But health care fundamentally is, this whole idea that health care is somehow going to be a burden on our economy, that somehow it's a problem, it's an ever growing consumer of resources. It's just would drive Drucker crazy. Drucker says, don't solve problems, pursue opportunities. Healthcare is a huge opportunity. Its yield is people who live longer and produce more. And it should have yields far exceeding its cost. And the opportunities in healthcare through the Biotech Revolution, which is an information tech, biotech is completely based to the extent that it's successful on information theory, because they've discovered that the human body is essentially a programmable platform rather than a chemical and physical system that can be bombarded by different kinds of chemicals. It's an information system that can be reprogrammed to produce the enzymes and hormones and molecules that are needed by any particular system. And so, the Discovery Institute has produced its IT director for the last 12 years has launched a company called ImmuSoft that actually programs the bone marrow to produce the drugs that are needed for the body. I discuss it in the acknowledgments of knowledge and power, because it's quite a existence-proof affirmation of the potential for healthcare and extending human lives and expanding human productivity and improving human health, and all these things have huge positive economic yields. And so to have the government take over this system and regard it as a great burden and problem is just the opposite of desirable policy. I mean, it's just all the assumptions are wrong about it.
Thank you for your comments. Given that technology, I would assume well, we know aids in the dispersal of knowledge. Is the trade-off the loss of privacy, that privacy is dead?
Well, I was brought up in a small town, and my experience of small towns is that you know, everybody knows everything, and rumors periodically fly through the streets and across the valleys and hills and dales and hopelessly slander somebody. Periodically in the olden days, they used to burn a witch. When you were subjected to the rumors and slanders that are absolutely pervasive in small town life, there is no way to respond. You had to have a feud, in essence. You couldn't document that you didn't do whatever it was that that was alleged to have been done. So I just, the whole idea that there was some golden age when we had privacy is just nonsense. It's nonsense. And we probably have more privacy today. We probably have too much privacy. And that's the big problem. I mean, because the big threat today is terrorism, and it's biological, nuclear, chemical weapons in our cities killing millions and millions and millions of people. That's the threat. And the idea that the government shouldn't be manipulating our IRS. You know, we've already given up our privacy to the IRS. They know everything. And if that just systematic violation of privacy is, you know, this is an abuse of government. But, and all the people who are most scared of the government churning through Verizon's phone records to find terrorist patterns are enthusiastic about the total invasion of our privacy by the IRS. It's just liberals have are just delusional on this subject. They don't have it's just and meanwhile our information systems are vulnerable. Our whole civilization is vulnerable to attack by nihilists. There's an asymmetry. It's harder to defend against terrorism than to attack. And if you really just want to destroy civilization, there's a lot of advantages that accrue to the attacker. So, and the downside of technology is endowing the enemies of our civilization with more ways to destroy it. So it's absolutely indispensable that we continue forward to master all these technologies and maintain our leads in all these technologies, not ban them. When we ban them, we just give the terrorists a complete advantage. Our bioweapons could be absolutely devastating. We have to have a biotech industry that's so robust and educates so many people in ways of defending against bio threats that that we always prevail. But the idea, you know, if we can't go through patterns of phone calls and emails and whatever, we can't catch terrorists, and we might as well give up. And we will find ourselves living in solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short existence.
Hi, George. Yeah, I'll tell you, in this society right now, perhaps an even greater threat is the low information voter. And the stuff that you're talking about is so important for the average person to understand. Mm. You know, a thinking person understands that you are correct. Unfortunately, a thinking person on our side understands that you're correct in what you're saying. But how do we get this information out in a way that the low information voter is going to get it? Mm. You know, are we creating George Gilder GIFs and George Gilder memes, or have a cat spokesperson for George Gilder to get this out? Well, I mean, what are we doing to actually reach the low information voter? And what of what you're saying do you think is most important that the low information voter understand?
Well, you know, this preoccupation with low information voters is really a figment of the pollsters, which is, I think, a bogus science that is destroying our politics. And it's just, the public never has opinions. It's they have reactions. And the reactions are determined by the questions that the pollster asks. I mean, there's public opinion about who wins an election the day before. But the idea that there's a public opinion about all these other subjects that are imputed to the public is, I think, just an illusion that Walter Lippmann debunked way back in his book, Public Opinion, a century ago, and his book, The Phantom Public. The public is a phantom, and it's super low information. And the reason democracy can work is that it's representative. It generates leaders, not pollsters. I mean, it's creative leaders, and Turing machine, not Turing machines, responding to the inputs of the pollster bogus findings, but creative oracular leaders who people follow. And it's, you know, the whole Constitution is a work of genius that makes possible a democracy that can actually function in the face of the inexorable low information of voters, except about their own immediate individual situations. But to ask them about other things is just, it's manipulative and it's incorrect, and it paralyzes politicians. Politicians who follow the public opinion polls in time earn the contempt of the public, and that's what happens. And we need leaders, not poll takers, which is really what we got up there. It's really pathetic, and the media is the worst. You know, it propagates this illusion that these polls actually mean something.
In the back.
One of the underlying points you were making was the difference between the believing man is determined or free. And do you see an upswing in academia? Because it just seems like it's being completely overwhelmed in whether it's economics or psychology or other areas, history and philosophy, with the deterministic mindset that everybody is just a product of with the past or of their biological makeup. And as you're saying, that's not the recipe to understand what's actually going on. Do you see an upswing in academia? Because to me, it just seems like it's getting worse and worse.
Academia is, I mean, I don't see any hope in academia. I mean, I really don't. I mean, the more expensive the college, the worse, as far as I can see. And they do indeed believe in the determinist model, and which has been totally untenable since Gilder. He overthrew it. It's dead. Intellectually, it's dead. And so you have this utterly stultified kind of academy living hopelessly in the past, and it's really pathetic, and it's a threat to the future of the world and our civilization. But information theory fundamentally is a theory of freedom of choice. That's entropy. The model of information measures the freedom of choice of the agent, the communicator. And if the communicator had no choice, if it's a determinist model, then no information gets transmitted. So it's an affirmation of libertarianism. It's an intrinsically libertarian theory. But at the same time, it upholds the conservative proposition. It takes a no surprises carrier, what's a low entropy carrier, to bear creative surprises, high entropy information. And if you don't have a completely predictable carrier or channel, you can't differentiate the information from the noise at the other end. So that's why information systems all are gravitating toward the electromagnetic spectrum, whether it's down wires, fiber optic lines where light pulses, or all the wireless systems. They all use the electromagnetic spectrum, because the electromagnetic spectrum is guaranteed to be a low entropy carrier. It's predictable carrier, guaranteed by the speed of light. It's absolutely guaranteed that you're going to be able to differentiate the signal from the noise at the other end. You just subtract the carrier, which is the electromagnetic band that's bearing the signal. And so what this means is that the low entropy carrier in economics is the legal structure, the family stability, the monetary system. All these systems have to be no surprises and predictable in order to bear the unpredictable creations of entrepreneurs. So this is an answer to the libertarian assumption that anarchy is somehow free. Anarchy is noise, and it prohibits the transmission of information and creativity, wealth, and value. So you need these low entropy carriers, unsurprising carriers, marriage, stable democracy, predictable currency, all these, and if the carrier becomes high entropy, full of surprises, then the whole knowledge domains of the economy shrink, and values is reduced to arbitrage and fast trading and financial shuffling, all sort of characteristics of an economy where much of the profits comes from financial trading, not investing, but just trading, and even at high megahertz levels, thousands of transactions a minute, you know, which are it's the sign of an economy that's lost its long horizons of as a result of the stultification of the carrier through high entropy government, surprising, unpredictable assertions of government power.
We're about 5 minutes over.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Did you want to take one more question? Or,
yeah, all right.
Since you, I think this is on, but since you mentioned the low entropy characteristics, looking at like the Middle East and a lot of the post-revolution states, does that mean those states need to first get to a point, and all undeveloped nations need to first get to some sort of point in an economic pattern and a government pattern before they can use the information system? And then like what does that point look like before your theory could be applied to society?
Well, you do need a constitution, or you need a predictable set of policies that allow entrepreneurs to make long-term commitments that every enterprise is an experiment, and you have to be able to conduct these experiments and interpret their outcomes in a context of predictable law, contract, property rights, you know, all the conditions that heritage has upheld forever and measures in its various studies of freedom around the world. All these are absolutely vital to creating the low entropy carriers that can bear the high entropy, unexpected boons of human creativity. Thank you.
thank you very much.